Catherine will speak on my behalf. Mrs. Meghan Markle has repeatedly written to the palace seeking our intervention in the Epstein matter, but, like Andrew, she must face her own consequences.
Instead of remaining silent, the palace delivered a clear answer, and with it, every private hope Meghan had carried about returning to the monarchy collapsed in one devastating decision. Charles rejected her final plea for renewed royal access, and the palace confirmed the door was closed. Not delayed, not reconsidered, closed. Behind that word stood years of pain, silence, pride, and one king who finally refused to bend. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Meghan felt the answer before anyone explained it. She sat beside her phone reading the palace response once, then again as if a softer meaning might appear between the lines. It did not. The request pushed through official channels had been denied. Buckingham Palace confirmed Meghan would not be restored to any formal family role. That mattered because this was not a social snub. This was the institution saying she had no official path back. It mattered more because the plea had not been casual. For weeks, her representatives had exchanged messages with aides, searching for limited access, controlled invitations, and one sign that the freeze was ending. Charles carried the file like a burden, not a weapon. The king read the final request inside his private study, where silence made every word heavier. He understood that rejecting Meghan would wound Harry too, and that truth made the decision harder. Yet the monarch knew the crown could not survive on emotion alone. Royal access, meaning the right to attend protected family events and communicate through palace channels, had become too difficult to reopen. Charles set the file down, tired, because this was not triumph. It was admission. Something had broken, and the king no longer believed words could mend it. William's influence rested over the decision before the ink settled. A sealed note attached to the file suggested the prince had been consulted, and that detail changed the atmosphere. William did not need to raise his voice to shape the outcome. His concern was already inside the wording. The confirmation used firm language, and aides understood at once that this was not a pause or a door left open. It was a permanent line. Before the palace could control the shock, one question began moving through the corridors. What exactly had Meghan asked for that made Charles close the door so completely? And to understand why this rejection cut so deeply, the story must move from the palace statement to the people whose lives were trapped inside it. More than royal access was at stake: pride, memory, betrayal, and the crushing weight of being told that a family door no longer opened had become the real battle. Meghan stood on one side of the divide, still believing there was one final sentence that could change everything. Charles stood on the other, carrying the burden of kingship, while William waited in silence, knowing one wrong concession could reopen every wound. Meghan read the palace reply twice, and the second reading hurt more than the first. She had not asked to return as a full working royal, meaning a senior family member expected to carry out official duties on behalf of the crown. She had asked for something smaller, but emotionally larger: selected family moments, controlled appearances, and a sign that she was no longer frozen out. That mattered because public exclusion had become part of her story. It also mattered because every closed invitation reminded the world the split was not healed, only managed. Charles felt the weight differently. The king wanted to be seen as a father who could forgive, but the monarch also had to protect the institution, meaning the system of royal duties, public trust, and palace order that survives beyond one family argument. He told a senior aide in a private documented account that the rejection was painful because it pushed Harry further away. Charles did not say it with anger. He said it with the tired voice of a man who knew the crown sometimes demanded sacrifice from the heart before it asked anything from the hand. William's role became harder to ignore once aides compared the final wording with remarks the prince had made in an earlier private meeting. The language was calm, but the meaning was firm. Meghan's return, even in a limited way, could reopen old wounds for Catherine, unsettle the children, and pull the monarchy back into a storm it had barely survived. William had watched the family suffer through accusation, silence, and public pressure. He did not want revenge. He wanted a boundary. Charles, reading the same concern in his son's careful words, understood why the future king would not move. Camilla supported the rejection quietly, but feared what might come after it. She knew Meghan could turn silence into a weapon if the closed door became a public battle. Camilla had survived enough royal storms to recognize the danger in someone with nothing left to lose. Meghan, meanwhile, stared at the reply with disbelief, fading into stillness, as if the last illusion of return had been taken from her hands. More than rejecting her plea, the palace erased the hope that had inspired it. Yet the real reason behind Charles's refusal did not begin with Meghan's final message. It began with an earlier incident that changed the palace's patience into suspicion. Long before Charles rejected the plea, one private royal moment had already made forgiveness feel impossible. Every royal rupture has a moment everyone later remembers differently, but no one forgets. For Meghan and the palace, that moment came during a private Windsor remembrance reception, when a quiet conversation turned sharp. An aide stepped away, pale, and William's expression changed in front of everyone. From that night forward, the question was no longer whether Meghan could return. It was whether the family would ever trust her again. Meghan felt the exclusion before anyone explained it. She had been left out of a family-only balcony appearance, meaning a public moment where selected members of the royal family stand together above the crowd as a sign of unity. That mattered because a balcony place was never just a place to stand. It was a message. It told the public who belonged inside the royal circle and who had been pushed beyond it. Meghan saw that absence as deliberate, and the hurt quickly hardened into anger. She challenged palace aides after the remembrance reception, demanding to know why she had been removed from a moment she believed still involved her family. William watched the exchange become something darker. The prince had already carried years of public tension, but this moment felt different because it happened after a solemn ceremony when restraint was expected and grief still hung over the family. He heard Meghan question the aides, and he saw one of them step away pale, shaken by the confrontation. William did not see a woman asking for fairness. He saw proof that image, position, and control still sat dangerously close to every royal wound. Meghan felt humiliated, but he felt alarmed, and that difference became the crack neither side could cross. Charles saw it from across the room, and his face changed before he spoke. The king understood what a remembrance reception meant, a private gathering after a public ceremony where the family honors loss, duty, and shared history away from the cameras. That was why the timing mattered so much. The monarch had hoped grief might soften old bitterness. Instead, he watched resentment rise in the very place meant to quiet it. Charles did not interrupt at first. He simply watched, and in that silence, he understood that the family was no longer dealing with one request, one invitation, or one complaint. It was dealing with trust itself. A palace aide later placed a written account of the Windsor incident into a confidential file, meaning a restricted record prepared for senior royal review. Rather than easing the situation, the account preserved every painful detail. It described Meghan's sentence clearly. "You cannot erase me and expect silence." Those words unsettled the household because they sounded less like pain and more like a warning. Meghan may have meant them as self-defense, but the palace heard danger. That line followed the file all the way to Charles's desk, and when the king read it again, the confrontation everyone feared became unavoidable. So when Meghan's final plea reached the monarch, it carried not just words of return, it carried the echo of that night. Windsor changed everything. The confrontation did not happen before cameras. It happened behind closed doors, where every breath mattered and every pause sounded like judgment. Charles sat at the head of the room, Meghan's request placed before him, while William stood near the window, silent but immovable. No speeches, no ceremony, just a king, a future king, and the final question now. On could soften. Should Meghan be allowed back in? Charles knew everyone in that room understood the weight of what was coming. The king had called the private meeting after Meghan's final plea reached his desk, choosing to decide the matter before it leaked into headlines and forced the palace into panic. A private meeting, in royal terms, meant a closed discussion with only trusted figures present, where decisions could be shaped before becoming public. That mattered because one leak could turn a family wound into a media explosion. It also mattered because Meghan's request was not small. She wanted restored invitations to selected royal family events, limited palace communication access, and one public signal that the freeze around her name had finally ended. William stayed quiet until the wording became the battle. The prince heard Charles hesitate over the word rejected, and he understood why his father hated it. The word was cruel. It sounded final. It left no soft landing. But William also knew softer language would create false hope, and false hope had already cost the family too much. He reminded the king that Catherine had carried years of pressure without turning private pain into public conflict. He reminded him that the children had been dragged into storms they never chose. William's anger did not explode. It settled low in his voice, controlled and unmistakable. Charles removed his glasses, and the room changed. The monarch pressed his fingers to the page, as if the paper itself had become too heavy to hold. He did not look victorious. He looked wounded. Meghan's plea had reached him as a request for return. But to the king, it also carried the memory of every accusation, every silence, every broken attempt at peace. Charles understood that royal communication access meant permission to speak through protected palace channels, and reopening that path could blur the boundary the monarchy had fought to restore. Looking down at the file, the king quietly delivered his decision. "Then we close it." An aide moved before anyone else spoke. He slid forward a draft palace statement that had already been prepared, and that quiet gesture told the room something chilling. Someone had expected Charles to reach this decision before the king said it aloud. William saw it. Charles saw it too. The statement was not emotional. It was sharp, controlled, and built to end discussion. Meghan would not be named with cruelty, but she would be denied with certainty. The shock was not only that Charles rejected her, the greatest surprise was how quickly the power behind that rejection began to show itself. Once the statement left that room, it became clear this was no ordinary family refusal. This was royal authority moving with precision. Power inside the monarchy rarely announces itself. It moves through tone, timing, and the silence of people who already know the outcome. Charles signed the decision, but William's influence hung over every line. The rejection carried the king's authority, yet the future king's restraint. Inside the palace, that combination felt more final than anger. It felt like succession speaking before the crown had changed hands. Charles sat quietly after signing the final wording, staring at the bottom of the page as if the ink had taken something from him. The palace machinery moved fast now, meaning the private offices, senior aides, and communication staff who turn a royal decision into an official public message. That mattered because speed protected control. It also mattered because hesitation would invite leaks, rumors, and another wave of public pressure. The king had approved a firm confirmation, not a vague family statement, and everyone around him understood the difference. A vague statement could leave room for interpretation. This one was built to end the air in the room. William spoke carefully, but pain moved through every word. The prince's position was clear. Meghan's return, even limited and polished, could destabilize Catherine, unsettle the children, and shake the fragile public trust the monarchy had rebuilt. That trust mattered because the family had already survived years of accusation, distance, and emotional spectacle. It mattered because every new royal crack became a national argument before the family could even feel it privately. William did not speak like a man chasing punishment. He spoke like a brother who had accepted that Harry might move further away if the door stayed closed. Looking down as Harry's name came up, Charles understood exactly where the deepest pain in the decision lay. Harry was the wound inside it, and the king knew rejecting Meghan meant more than refusing one plea. It meant accepting that his son could see the refusal as rejection of the life he had chosen. Charles did not defend himself with grand words. He simply stayed still, carrying the cost. William noticed that stillness and softened his voice, but he did not change his position. The prince believed the monarchy could not keep reopening the same door just because the pain outside it had not faded. Camilla's absence from the final decision spoke louder than her presence ever could. A senior courtier noticed Charles did not ask the Queen Consort for her final opinion, and that detail quietly moved through the room. Camilla supported the rejection, but the choice belonged to the king and the heir alone. The phrase inside the statement made that clear. No further pathway to formal reintegration. Formal reintegration meant a structured return to royal recognition, duties, or protected family access. Palace staff understood the words instantly. They were coded, polished, and unmistakable. Meghan was not being paused. Meghan was being closed out. The statement left the room with discipline, but discipline could not soften what it carried. Charles had signed as monarch. William had shaped it as heir. Camilla had watched from the edge of influence. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, Meghan was about to receive a decision that would not feel like policy, order, or duty. It would feel personal. Every closed door creates an echo, and the first person to feel that echo was not Charles or William. It was Meghan. While the palace moved with discipline, she received the decision as something far more personal than policy. There are moments when a person does not need anyone to explain what has happened. Meghan knew the meaning before she reached the final line. The wording was too clean, too cold, too deliberate. It did not invite negotiation. It did not leave room for dignity-saving ambiguity. It told her, in the careful language of monarchy, that the chapter she had tried to reopen had been shut from the other side. Meghan received the final palace response through a private channel before the public confirmation appeared. A private channel meant a controlled line of communication used to deliver sensitive decisions before they reached the press. That mattered because it gave her only minutes to absorb the rejection before the world began judging it. It also mattered because the palace wanted control, not conversation. The reply made clear that future royal attendance, internal palace contact, and symbolic restoration were all denied. Royal attendance meant permission to appear at family-linked events under palace approval, while symbolic restoration meant any public sign that she had been welcomed back into the royal circle. As she finished reading, Meghan tightened her grip on the edge of the table. She did not cry at first. That was what made the moment heavier. The shock sat still on her face, turning into something colder as every line removed another possibility. No future invitation, no protected palace contact, no carefully worded return. Meghan had asked for a small opening, but the answer treated even that opening as too dangerous. The refusal struck at more than access. It touched her pride, her identity, and the story she had built around being more than someone the palace could push outside. Harry watched her reaction and understood the damage before she spoke. He had seen Meghan angry before, and he had seen her wounded, but this silence frightened him even more. Harry knew the decision was not just a palace matter. It reached into their marriage, their public image, and the painful space between his old family and his new life. He asked whether there was still someone he could call: Charles, a senior aide, anyone who might explain the wording or soften the blow. Meghan did not answer at once, and that silence told him the truth. Meghan paused at one phrase: the family position is settled. Those words cut differently. They told her that more than Charles had spoken through the response. The king's authority was there, but William's restraint was there too. Harry saw her eyes stop on the sentence, and he knew she understood it. This was not one man's hesitation. This was a family boundary, shaped into palace language. The phrase sounded calm, but beneath it sat a verdict. No more appeals, no more backdoors, no one left to persuade. Harry lowered his voice, but Meghan had already moved beyond the question. He could call, but calling would not reopen what had been closed. She could fight, but fighting would only prove the palace right. For the first time, Meghan seemed to understand the door had not been slammed in anger. It had been locked with discipline. In the silence between them, the story shifted from rejection to reckoning, forcing Charles and Meghan toward one final private human moment before the world could turn the decision into headlines. Two people on opposite sides of the breach had to face what had been lost. The turning point came not with a palace statement, but with a voice on a private line. No aides, no advisors, no carefully polished phrases. Just Charles and Meghan, separated by years of accusation and expectation, speaking after the decision had already been made. It was not a negotiation. It was not a reconciliation. It was something colder and sadder, the final courtesy before the door stayed closed. Charles agreed to the call because silence would have made the rejection feel even harder. The king knew Meghan had already received the formal answer, but he also knew the human pain behind it could not be handled only through palace wording. Rather than a private family conversation, it was a formal rejection issued through approved royal channels. That mattered because the decision carried royal authority, but the wound was personal. It also mattered because Meghan had not only asked for access, she had asked in her own way to be seen again by the family she believed had pushed her outside. Meghan answered with control, but control did not hide the hurt. She did not begin with anger. She asked Charles one question that cut through every palace phrase. Was there ever a version of her return he could have accepted? The king paused long enough for the answer to hurt before he spoke. Meghan heard that pause and understood it before the words arrived. Charles told her he could not rebuild trust by announcement. Trust, in this moment, meant confidence that private family pain would not become public pressure again, and the monarch no longer had that confidence. Charles did not speak like a man seeking victory. He spoke like a father trapped inside a crown. Meghan absorbed his words with controlled grief, and that restraint made the call feel even heavier. She had expected refusal from the institution, but hearing it from the king made it sharper. Charles told her, "This is not punishment, it is protection." That sentence revealed everything. The palace had not framed the rejection as revenge. It had framed it as a shield around William, Catherine, the children, and the fragile calm the monarchy had fought to rebuild. Meghan did not beg again. That was the moment the call changed. She simply said she understood what the family had chosen, and in those words, her final plea surrendered its last breath. Charles heard the quiet in her voice and knew the damage had landed. Meghan heard the firmness in his and knew the decision would not bend. No aide softened it, no advisor translated it. For the first time in the crisis, the wound spoke directly to the crown. Charles ended the call knowing mercy had not changed the outcome. Meghan ended it knowing dignity was all she had left to protect. The king had given her one final courtesy, but not one final chance. Once that call ended, the monarchy could no longer hide behind private language. The closed door had moved from paper to voice, from policy to pain, from family tension to public consequence. And when the news broke beyond palace walls, the rejection became more than a family decision. It became a national spectacle. By morning, the private rejection had become a public image. Britain woke to a single brutal phrase printed across front pages, repeated by broadcasters, and debated outside palace gates. Rather than belonging only to Charles or Meghan, the story had become the nation's to watch as a royal door closed in real time. For once, the palace did not chase the headlines. It allowed silence to speak. Charles watched the coverage briefly, and the longer he looked, the heavier the decision felt. The palace confirmation spread across major broadcasts before breakfast, with commentators describing it as the clearest sign yet that Meghan would not be formally welcomed back. A palace confirmation meant an official message released through royal communication channels instead of private gossip. That mattered because it transformed the rejection from a family decision into a public position. The monarchy had chosen certainty over emotional explanation, leaving the world to see the outcome without witnessing the personal pain behind it. Meghan saw the headlines and looked away. She already knew the answer was final, but seeing it become public made the disappointment feel even more real. The story quickly became the center of national discussion because it combined family conflict, royal authority, and the end of any hope for a formal return. Charles turned off the television before the coverage ended. He understood that no royal decision remains private for long. What had started inside palace walls had become a national conversation, with every reaction adding more weight to the choice he had already made. Outside Buckingham Palace, people gathered quietly near the gates. Some stopped to watch, others took photos, while many simply wondered what the decision would mean for the future of the royal family. The silence outside often said more than the commentary on television. Meghan had been denied. Charles had stood by his decision. William's influence had been clear throughout the process, and the official statement confirmed that the palace intended to leave no uncertainty about its position. Charles understood the personal cost after the headlines settled. He believed he had acted to protect the monarchy, even knowing that doing so came with painful consequences for his own family. Meghan also understood that the response left no room for another appeal. or another attempt to reopen the discussion. Harry faced perhaps the hardest position of all, caught between the family he was born into and the life he had built. The decision did not erase the past, but it confirmed that no official path back remained. In the end, the monarchy chose closure over uncertainty and stability over another difficult compromise. Whether that decision will be remembered as necessary or regrettable is something history will decide. For those involved, however, it marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, leave a comment below with your thoughts, and subscribe for more royal news and updates. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.